does deprive and in fact seriously injures certain functions. And so I think it's on the basis of that that there's been a very strong condemnation of female circumcision, whereas nobody seems to get very excited about male circumcision.
Well, it's not very well known, but there's really a movement to stop circumcision.
Oh, yes, there is, yeah.
And males who are beginning to understand what was done to them are beginning to understand that it seriously has impaired them.
Yeah. But historically that was not so.
Yeah.
But I know there is today, that's so, and pediatricians today tend to be pretty much anti-male circumcision at the present time. Julia? Yes?
Just building on what Dr. Elliott was asking, do you recognize other common patterns in the development of doctrine on medical ethics or bioethics? Other things historically that have sort of played out the same way, maybe on other topics? For example, the Vatican takes a conservative position, something happens under it?
Yes, very definitely there are patterns of that sort. There's a very, very old doctrine that goes back again to the 16th century, which is briefly described as ordinary and extraordinary means. Father Bretsky told me today at lunch that he recently was interviewed about the Shivo case, and was asked by the commentator to explain the principle of ordinary and extraordinary means in 12 seconds. But that, of course, is the principle of ordinary and extraordinary means of life support. That had been around for a long time, but was quoted by Pope Pius XII to an international conference of physicians, anesthesiologists in 1954, and became the basis of much of our thinking about the life support issue. By 1954, the question of how one applies ordinary and extraordinary means to the new technologies, such as the use of ventilators, had become an issue that no one had ever addressed before. And so that's a pattern of thought that's very important. I think that another interesting aspect of the question is, are we going to see development of doctrine of a similar sort with regard to an issue like stem cell research? That seems to have been stalled very definitely in Catholic thought over the issue of the nature of fetal life. But if we get closer and closer to finding genuine applications and genuine utility in stem cell research, will we find a similarity to the development in transplantation, which moved from a very highly experimental and highly risky procedure in the 1950s to one that could provide genuine benefit. I think that's an interesting example of whether we will see that sort of doctrinal change. It doesn't seem possible at the present time, but you can't rule out anything. Okay?
This may be delusional, but it seems to me that at some point I read that there were scientists who were upset about the fact that some of the studies that the Nazis conducted actually did contribute medical knowledge. And there was this ethical question as to whether one could apply findings. Did you ever run across anything like that?
Yes.
Whether they could apply these findings since they were obtained in this horrible way. I don't know how I stated it well, but...
Yes, well, what you say is exactly true. In fact, a colleague of mine at the University of Washington, who was a physiologist, was in possession of a large amount of Nazi data, which had to do precisely with the example I gave, that is with temperature regulation. That, among all of the Nazi work, seems to be almost the only one that had any value. And it can't be repeated. You can't put people to death in order to find out how cold you can make them. But my colleague had the data, said that it was usable data, and he was the one who raised that question publicly among his colleagues in about 1992 or 93. And the matter was discussed at a major meeting of the physiologists. Another leading person in the field of medical ethics, Dr. J. Katz of Yale University, argued vigorously against the use of that data, immorally obtained. And the argument has really not gone anywhere. Nobody has been willing really to use the data. People have said, well, it may be important, but there are lots of other ways we can go about the same issue. Let's not step into it. Fortunately, nothing else seems to have been of any use. Very sloppily obtained. A strange thing, because some of these German officers were well trained scientists, and yet they were very sloppy in the work that they did. So I'm told. Ralph.
Brought it out of my throat. Okay. I'm struck by your use of the word evolution thought and the connection, and do you see this in other areas of theology? What I would think of as a kind of Hierarchian concept that we in fact should expect thought to change over time. That there will be evolution literally, and his concept of evolution was in fact that we become more aware of ourselves, for example. Become more aware of ourselves. So we grow as human beings. We're not, our creation is not complete, so to speak. And you observe, even though you disclaimed that you have kept in touch very much with theological problems. Is your impression, however, that there is this sort of evolutionary phenomenon in a number of different fields?
I was just about to disclaim again. I have to admit that I used to be something of a Teilhardian, and have a great deal of sympathy for that. I referred earlier to Cardinal Newman and his beautiful exposition of the development of doctrine. But I don't know quite how that applies to doctrinal issues.